Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Monday, October 7th, 2019 Edina Parks and Recreation Commission meeting. Janet, can we have a roll call, please?
Yep. Commissioner Osborne? Here. Commissioner McCauley? Here. Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Darlene?
Here.
Commissioner Good?
Here.
Commissioner Itis?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner McCormick?
All right, thank you, Janet. First up, can I have, we should have our meeting agenda in front of you all. Could I have a motion to approve our meeting agenda for this evening?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the agenda for this evening? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passed. Second, we have our meeting minutes from our meeting of Tuesday, September 10th, 2019. May I have a motion to approve our meeting minutes?
So move.
Sir, any discussion on our meeting minutes from last month? No issues, no questions. Hearing none. All in favor of approving our meeting minutes from last month, say aye. Aye. Opposed? None? Passed. Okay, next up, community comment. Anyone in the audience this evening that would like to offer a comment to the commission? Yes, come on up. We'll get you a microphone, and if you would, state your name and address, and you've got 3 minutes for community comment.
Hello, I'm Oscar Greaves, and I'm a 5th grader from Highlands Elementary School. I live at 4215 Oakdale Avenue South, and I have a concern about public skate parks in Edina. If I want to go to a skate park, my parents would have to drive me to Golden Valley, Minneapolis, or even Richfield. There's a pretty new skate park in St. Louis Park. It's closer than all the cities I just mentioned, but I still need a ride. There are 36 public tennis courts in Edina, and there are 10 locations that have public baseball/softball fields, and there aren't any public skate parks in Edina. Through my research, I couldn't find any professional tennis tournaments that have been hosted in Minnesota. But Minnesota has hosted the X Games 3 times, and probably many more times in the future. The X Games is a competition celebrating sports like skateboarding and BMX bike riding. Also, in the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, there's going to be 2 skateboarding events. Think how much the popularity of those sports has gone up. And also, in a recent survey in the U.S., skateboarding was found to be the 3rd most popular sport for teens, coming in after basketball and football. But yet, there are no public skate parks in Edina. One of my main reasons of wanting a skate park is because skateboarders like to do this thing called street skating. Street skating is where you go skateboard on public stairs, rails, and much more. Skaters could get kicked out of that spot that they like skateboarding in because they could be damaging their property. I want to bring the terrains of the streets into a skate park. Another reason I want a skate park is because you get to meet and learn from other kids you have not met who have the same interests as you. When I skateboard, I get kind of nervous skateboarding in front of other people who might be better than me, but when I get more comfortable, I start to cheer them on, I get to know them better, and when I go back to that skate park, I'm hoping they will be there again. Having a nice and convenient nearby skate park would mean a lot for me and my skate friends, and probably many more kids. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you, Oscar. Do you mind if I ask you one question before you sit down?
Sure.
Tell me again, if you think about the Twin Cities area, where's the most popular skate park today?
Probably Third Layer in Golden Valley.
In Golden Valley. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. We are constantly looking at our assets in the city, so appreciate your willingness to share with us your thoughts on skate parks.
Can I ask him one question? Because I know that he has
Sure.
an idea.
Yeah.
Just so we all can hear your idea. There's a certain place in mind that you kind of had scoped out in Edina that you thought would be a great place, right?
Weber Park, right in the border of St. Louis Park and Edina. The skateboarding popularity has gone up that I've seen in the Morningside area. So, yeah, a lot of my friends would really like them there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Oscar.
Which park was it? Weber.
Yep. Any other comment this evening? Any other community comments? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to reports and recommendations. First up, presentation on pedestrian and bicycle master plan. Andrew, I think you're going to take us through that this evening.
Yes, sir. Commissioners, thank you for having me this evening. I'm Andrew Scipione, Transportation Planner for the City of Edina, and today I'm going to just very briefly walk through the Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan. So among other things, I'll be talking about, just briefly about the development of this plan, some of the guiding principles in it, how it's currently being implemented, what my role is as staff, and what the role of our Transportation Commission is, and then take any questions you may have on the plan. So the main impetus for creating the Ped and Bike Master Plan was the Comprehensive Plan Update in 2018. So prior to 2018, the city had a bicycle transportation plan that was approved in 2008, as well as a sidewalk facilities map that was a 2014 amendment to the Comprehensive Plan. And those are the two main guiding documents for non-motorized transportation infrastructure in the city. So between 2008 and 2018, there's been a change in industry thinking, industry trends as far as the infrastructure recommendations, as well as changes in the thinking of Edina residents. So the 2018 comprehensive plan was a good opportunity to update that plan and consolidate those two into one plan. Developing this plan went through about an 8-month public engagement process. There were 2 open houses, 3 pop-up workshops. One of them was at Centennial Lakes Farmers Market, one was at Jerry's, another was at Bredesen Park. The listening session was held at Edina High School to get the perspective of Edina High School students. There were 3 discussions held at Transportation Commission meetings. There was a Planning Commission work session, a Planning Commission public hearing, and then finally a City Council public hearing in February of last year. So this is a picture taken at one of the open houses that was held for this. This is a 16-foot by 20-foot floor map of the city of Edina, where participants were invited to use Post-its to mark where they live, where they work, where they travel, where they recreate, things like that. And then the yarn was used to show corridors where they currently bike or walk, areas where they want to bike or walk but currently are unable to or don't feel comfortable doing so, as well as denoting barriers to walking or biking in town. So this map here shows that same exercise was replicated online, and this map here, which is included in the plan, is a summary of all of that feedback that was received. So there you can see walking routes, biking routes, destinations, important destinations that residents noted, and what barriers exist in the city to walking and biking. So to summarize briefly what was heard during this public engagement process, walking and biking are fun, valued activities in the city. There's gaps to the existing network that make walking and biking difficult. Walking and biking close to motorized traffic is stressful and therefore less attractive. It's uncomfortable for many users to cross intersections, particularly in large roads, like France Avenue is one that's often highlighted. Maintaining facilities year-round is important to many residents, and finding routes to destinations can be difficult. So what was developed with the plan then was a set of guiding principles, and one of these main guiding principles was this idea of all ages and abilities. So designing facilities for not only those who currently bike and walk, but for those who are interested in biking and walking, but may not feel comfortable doing so right now. And the plan references this. This graphic is taken from the city of Portland. They developed this 4 types of bicycle riders framework. And what this graphic shows is there's in general, a significant percentage of the population, 60% shown here roughly, that is interested but concerned about bicycling. They want to do it, but there's a low stress tolerance, so they're looking for comfortable facilities. If they do bike, they tend to stick to trails, areas that are separated from motor vehicle traffic, where they feel most comfortable. So that's the user group that we were really trying to target in developing this plan. Some other guiding principles that were developed, improving safety, the perception of safety, and user comfort. As I said, developing facilities to address gaps that are currently in the network, creating networks that the development of those networks would be the framework for improvements in the city, making connections for everyday uses and needs and connecting to regional and local assets and destinations. Those guiding principles helped shape what we're calling the Twin Loops concept. This is basically the backbone of our ped and bike network. It's a high comfort amenity that's separated from motor vehicle traffic. That outer loop there is following the Grand Loop concept that was initially proposed in the 2015 Strategic Park Plan. And the goal here, among other things, was to connect to parks, schools, community destinations, other cities. The recently completed 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail also plays an important role in this network. So this graphic here shows really highlights where this facility is connecting to. So the focus of the inner loop was connecting to a lot of the schools in Edina, and then the outer loop connects to at least 10 parks in all 4 quadrants of the city, as well as the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. Some other guiding principles that were developed in the plan: continuous and quantitative and qualitative evaluation are important for the success of the plan and for continuing the plan. Experimentation of potential solutions through tactical urbanism was recommended. It was recommended to consider year-round approaches for maintenance, communications, and programming. And then it was recommended to develop a really resilient, sustainable network of sidewalks and bike facilities. So along with that Twin Loops concept, some additional infrastructure that's recommended in the plan. There's about 50 miles of new sidewalks that are proposed throughout the city, about 60 miles of new bicycle facilities, both of which are significant increases into what our current network has, along with 9 new miles of shared use path, with the majority of which is that Twin Loops facility. So there's a few different opportunities for implementation of these infrastructure recommendations. The 2 primary ones that the city has been utilizing are correlating these projects with scheduled roadway and utility reconstruction projects, the majority of them being our local roadway reconstruction projects. Another opportunity we have is when we have other pavement maintenance activities. So when we do mill and overlays, when we do seal coats, those are opportunities where we can look at adjusting lane striping and add on-street bike facilities, for example. And then we have done a significant number of standalone projects to implement sidewalks on our municipal state aid routes or our active routes to school, which this picture here of the Oaklawn sidewalk was an active routes to school recommendation. Another opportunity we have is during private development or redevelopment. This is an example of the new Jimmy John's and Starbucks that's at the corner of Metro Boulevard and Edina Industrial. As part of this process, the city required the developer to install sidewalks on the perimeter of the property, as was recommended in the plan. You can see it goes all the way to the property line on either side to then be extended further in the future, either as those parcels develop or as a roadway or utility project comes up along those corridors. So my role as transportation planner, my primary responsibility is to administer the city's pedestrian and cyclist safety fund, or the PACS fund as we call it. If you're not familiar with it, it's a franchise fee on customers of Excel and Centerpoint Energy. Generates about $1.2 million a year, and it's dedicated exclusively to improvements to the city's non-motorized transportation network. So my role is to prioritize this funding from year to year by looking at our pavement maintenance plans, looking at active routes school recommendations, considering resident petitions that we get for sidewalks, bike lanes, those kinds of things. Every year I give presentations to both the Transportation Commission and to City Council on what was spent the previous year from the PACS fund. And then I also am involved in reviewing private developments for opportunities for ped and bike infrastructure improvements that are recommended in the plan. In addition, I'm actively pursuing sources of additional funding, grants, cost shares, opportunities so that we can make our PAX fund stretch as far out as far as we can. The Transportation Commission, as I said, they receive a report from me every year on what was spent from the PAX fund the previous year. They also get a preview of what I'm anticipating of spending with the PAX fund for the next 2 years, and they have the opportunity there to comment on it, and then those comments are incorporated into my report when it goes to City Council shortly after. The Transportation Commission also, with the roadway reconstruction projects, they receive the draft engineering studies for their comment, and those oftentimes include some kind of non-motorized component, whether it be a sidewalk or a bike facility, and they have an opportunity there, again, to comment on what staff is proposing before it goes to City Council. So I've got a copy of the full plan here, but it's also available on the city's website if you're interested in learning more, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Andrew. Questions?
I got a couple. Just for clarification, I think like slide 3 or 4, you talked about barriers. Are those for walking and biking? Is that physical barriers, or is it what you referenced in the next slide, which was people don't like it because they're really busy streets?
Good question. So I would say generally it could be either one. So I like this example of the floor map here, for example, these 2 lines at the quadrant corners right here at Highway 162. So that's what I would consider a physical barrier versus this red line here on France Avenue. Now, along that section, there are crosswalk markings and there are signals. There is infrastructure there to facilitate crossing, but that may be an example of where it's not so much a physical barrier, it's more the barrier's more having to do with level of comfort.
Sure. Okay. Just out of curiosity, how much was spent out of the PAX fund last year, if you got 1.2 million?
Ooh, last year I believe it was around $700,000.
And then that surplus is used how?
The surplus is rolled over
Got
from
it.
year to year.
Okay. And then the last thing I was wondering was, bikes and walkways, or bikers and pedestrians. There's other forms of transportation that might use these things. Resident Greaves, who right behind you, is talking about skateboarding. It's not just the park, it's getting there. Are those types of things being considered when you're putting together this plan in terms of recumbent bikes and rollerbladers and skateboarders and all those types of things, since those would potentially be the multi-use or other people that would want to use this in a green way of getting around the city?
Sure. I would say there is a figure in here in the plan actually that talks about different modes or different types of bicycles, like the recumbent bicycles. I'm not sure that there's anything specific in here to skateboards or that type, but I would say the idea of that shared use path being open to all modes of transportation kind of follows along that premise of being open to all users of all abilities, so long as it's legally permitted within the city of Edina.
Other questions? Corin?
So not so much a question, just some context behind. So in our last meeting, we gave an update on the project that we were working on for ourselves around the ground rounds and making sure it's more connected. And this is where we kind of said our follow-up was have him come and share out the things that we already are doing. So really, when we first met, it was like, here's some of the ideas of let's look at the map, here's where the opportunities are. And then Eric came and was like, hey, Andrew showed us this, and we're like, oh, a lot of those things are already covered. It's just more of the, hey, when can we get that done? And then we talked about the PAX fund and ways of using it. One we talked about being like signage saying like if you think about on Wooddale, it says, 0.2 more miles to Roslyn Park. So some of those different things. So that's really just some context around why we had Andrew come in terms of, do we check off that box of the project that we've been working on, or are there ways that we can help utilize the surplus that was unused, and maybe that's part of our project is helping I'm not sure, helping you figure out what that prioritization is, or do we feel like this is at a place that we should close the loop? I guess is where I want to, my question to you and to us is, do we feel like this is something that we should continue on as an active project? If so, which parts, and if not, do we check that box? So, question to all.
Okay, Perry?
Chair, members of the commission, I think that's exactly why it was wise to have Andrew come this evening. I think Andrew and I are both new to our roles, so kind of matching up as we kind of became onboarded here at the city, seeing that the Park Commission and the Transportation Commission had kind of this shared work plan item, and then finding Andrew's work on this, we thought it would be an opportune time to kind of mirror that up to say, when the work plan was established, kind of does this report and this effort kind of meet the needs of what you were striving for in that goal? So to mimic Commissioner Nelson, I think it was an opportune time to say, kind of with that input, is this where we'd like to be? As staff, we could provide once a year an update as it goes from the Transportation Commission to the City Council. I could provide those recommendations that commission has that's going to the City Council, so you're kind of in the loop and in the know. I think that's been one of the goals we've discussed is, being in the know as things are heading to the City Council. Maybe they're not exactly within your purview, but as an informational item, we could provide that to you.
Well, maybe building off of that, one question I'd have, Andrew, on this slide that you have right here is how much of this, understanding the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail is in place, how much of this is constructed, operational, how much of it remains conceptual?
So a significant, a significant portion of this system has not been constructed yet. The 9 Mile Creek Trail obviously is completely constructed, but otherwise there's a section of this system that we recently constructed on West 62nd Street last year. There's another piece of it on 58th Street that we're proposing to reconstruct next year along with the street project. And there's sections like down in the promenade, for example, that already exist. But by and large, this system as a shared use path, the majority of it is not yet in place. Some of this follows existing sidewalks that are proposed to be upgraded to a shared use path. But again, a lot of this is currently not built up to the standard that the plan wants it to be.
Okay. And from what we heard earlier this year, and I'm sure you're aware of as well, we could add on here the CP trail that's potentially in the future, right? Not all approved yet, but
correct. Yes, this plan was developed before the CP rail trail was kind of more official. But yes, that is a consideration that we have in mind as we're developing out this system.
Yep.
And Chair, I just wanted to point out for those maybe watching later, the CP trail is a regional trail being proposed by the Three Rivers Park District.
Right. Good addition. One other question, maybe a couple I had, it's on slide 14 where you had some pictures of examples. Are those all considered, on the right and the left, would you consider both of those shared use trails, or is one just pedestrian? And clearly the middle one has the bike lane called out to it, but how would you categorize the other two?
Certainly, good question. So admittedly it's a little tricky here because in Edina bicycles are technically permitted on the sidewalks.
Right.
But typically when we talk about, or at least when I talk about sidewalks, I consider them mainly a pedestrian facility.
Okay.
So the images on the left and the right, I would consider sidewalks. I would consider predominantly a pedestrian facility. Whereas the image in the middle shows a dedicated bike lane on the street.
Okay.
I had just a quick question for you on, is it really sidewalks and this type of biking lane on a street, or could it also incorporate paths that take pedestrians to a location that might not be next to a street?
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding.
Well, one thing we've
Like
been
a
looking at is
spur?
like Braemar and trying to connect that whole area, and there's parts of it would be next to the street, parts of it I could imagine might be going through the park. Could that fall in part of your project? Because a lot of the grand rounds, too, I thought that was one of the areas we were particularly looking at with the signage and making it connected. And some of it wasn't very safe for people to get from one place to the
Yeah, similar to Bredesen, because parts of it go along the street and then parts of it kind of go back in the woods. And there is 2 different paths for bike and for walking. So I think that's really when we looked at it, was how do we continue to make sure that there's connection points throughout of it, and as well as safety and riding your bike, not just to get from A to B, but to have a little bit of fun and exercise as well.
But the impression, and Andrew, I'm sure you could answer this, the impression I got listening to this is this was more on a connectivity perspective than going through trails. So Bredesen, inside Bredesen or inside Braemar, we're looking at adding trails. I would assume that's outside of what you've got here?
Generally speaking, I would agree. So to your point about if the commission is looking to add trail segments within a park, that's something that I would think probably falls more into the purview of Parks and Recreation. That being said, so the main opportunities that I look for are street reconstruction projects or overlay projects, developments, but I'm comparing all of those to these two maps here, where we have an approved plan and approved network. So if there's segments that are not on this network, I generally am not considering those unless I receive a petition for them, for example.
I think it's a point of clarification. The answer is yes. We kind of look at them maybe from almost simplistically two different perspectives. One is moving people in more of a transportation sense, and the other, I think you referenced in the parks, is more of that passive recreation. However, they both can be used to accomplish, I think, our same goals of connecting people to locations. So
Right, because
whether
some
if
of
it's
are
whether if it's
safety related to make sure kids aren't on the street.
correct. So it's getting people off streets to walk, which the connectivity piece may also accomplish the same goal using Bredesen, or if we do build additional trails at Braemar Park, for example, could kind of do both passive and transportation. It could complete a missing link, I guess you could say, and also be a passive piece. So I think working together, we can accomplish both goals. And I think there was like maybe a picture on your cover slide of the report that maybe had a little bit, and maybe I'm incorrect, but similar to maybe that picture on the right, that could be a little bit of both.
And even looking at the plan here, so a portion of the Twin Loops facility goes along park paths in Arden Park, for example. Another portion of it follows park paths in Pamela Park. So to that point of a facility like that being serving a transportation purpose as well as a passive recreational purpose.
Andrew,
Mike.
a couple of questions. Is there any kind of target date for completion on this?
As soon as possible.
We're all for that.
Realistically, this plan is, I would say, a 20 or 30 year at least document or guiding document. I would put it in that time frame for build out.
Okay. And then the loops that you had broadly outlined, would that loop then consist of partial roads, partial bike lanes, partial shared use path, partial, and just kind of connected together that way?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. I apologize for not making that clear. So this system specifically, this Twin Loops concept, is intended to be completely separated from motor vehicle traffic as a shared use path. So a specific dedicated facility only for pedestrians and bicyclists, non-motorized transportation.
Okay, all right, super. And then back on 13, I think was the slide. There's a lot of different colors and dots and stuff, but there's not a key to it. So what are the purple and the green and the blue and everything else that are all these dotted lines?
Certainly. So the image on the left is the pedestrian facility network, so the sidewalks. The green lines show either a new shared use path, that Twin Loops facility, or kind of the lighter green color is showing an existing sidewalk that's proposed to be upgraded to a shared use path. The solid orange color are existing sidewalk facilities. The kind of orange and white dotted color are what we call primary sidewalks. The main distinction between primary and secondary sidewalks are that the primary sidewalks connect to one of those twin loop facilities. And then the purple lines show proposed secondary sidewalks. On the right are the bicycle facilities. The purplish color, I believe, are what we call neighborhood slow streets, which typically don't necessarily involve specific dedicated infrastructure. They're more of a shared facility that could have pavement markings or signage to make drivers more alert to bicyclists that could be traveling along those corridors. The blue color are the light blue color are standard on-street bike lanes. The dark blue color are buffered on-street bike lanes. And then again, the green colors are that shared use path, that Twin Loops facility.
And anything that's a dotted line is a proposed path?
Correct.
Okay, so solid is existing, dotted line proposed?
Correct. With the exception that white and green dotted line is an existing facility. It's just proposed to be upgraded to something else, to a higher level. So on the sidewalks, for example, the white and green dotted line is an existing sidewalk that's proposed to be upgraded to a shared use path.
And then, and again, on the right-hand one, where the dark orange highlight goes all the way around on the loops, you're saying that the plan is that those dark orange highlighted areas are going to be specifically for pedestrian and bike only?
Correct. There'll be a dedicated off-street facility.
Off-street path. Okay. All right. Okay. And then I didn't read through the whole plan, but
you didn't? It's only this long.
I know.
You'll finish it tonight.
Well, it was on both sides of the paper. That threw me. So
I apologize.
Is there signage anywhere in there?
Wayfinding is mentioned
Wayfinding.
in here very briefly. It's one page of the plan, and it just more kind of has general recommendations for wayfinding. From my perspective at this point, I'm kind of focusing on getting the actual infrastructure, the actual trails and lanes and sidewalks built out before I really start
Sure.
considering signage and wayfinding.
No. Okay. All right. And then when you guys were doing the planning and meeting, and was there consideration for park-to-park paths? So I know you talked about the parks that are on the loop and the schools that are on the inner loop, but then was there also any talk of park-to-park paths? Like, there's a lot of parks that don't touch either of the loops. And I didn't know if that just came up in your meetings, if that was considered at all, or if that would just make it so crazy that you couldn't do anything.
So admittedly, I wasn't in this position at the time that this plan was really being developed, so I can't speak too much to what was considered or what wasn't considered. I would say that generally speaking, the parks that are not necessarily directly on this Twin Loops system, majority of the time are recommended to have some kind of either a sidewalk or a bike facility, something next to them to connect them to the rest of the system. In cases where they're not, those are opportunities like with roadway reconstruction where we could consider doing other improvements, but I guess if that answers your question.
Okay, all right.
Eileen?
Couple of questions. Where roadway reconstruction is not part of getting it done, has there been a cost analysis, and is funding an issue in getting those parts completed that you don't have to wait for road reconstruction?
Good question. So generally these projects are significantly less expensive to construct when we're doing them as part of a larger project, whether it's a roadway reconstruction or a utility project. I don't have those numbers with me offhand, but generally speaking, it is much more cost effective to install these facilities when we have opportunity in street reconstruction. So that's why I'm focusing mainly on those opportunities.
Were there any significant parts that wouldn't need to wait for that of this whole plan? Because you mentioned it's 20 to 30 years, and I assume that's mostly because of road reconstruction and waiting for the projects to come up.
That in addition to just the level of funding itself, that $1.2 million can only gets us so
Right.
far every year,
So if there was additional funding, it could speed parts of this up or not?
potentially.
Okay.
Andrew, one of the things that's I at least find as an asset to the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail are the dedicated bridges that it has over 62 and 100. Any consideration of that in the mapping that you've got here, or is this all tied to existing road surface or off of road surfaces?
This system is currently all based on existing highway crossings. Those two bridges that you mentioned were a significant cost to that project. And if we were to have to construct a new bridge or desire to construct a new bridge, for example, that bridge alone would wipe out the PAX fund for at least a year, if not a couple years, I would say, generally speaking.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Corin?
I'm going to go back to the original question I asked, which is, I think we need to understand if we think that we should mark this project as something that we feel like is complete, or do we feel like this is something that we should continue this partnership in terms of, and if so, does that mean helping you figure out your prioritization, or do we call this done and have Perry bring us back in as we need to? I'm just thinking about all the projects we have to complete. Do we want to continue this on our action log every week? And do we want to schedule meetings, or is it something that needs to take, I mean, and I know my opinion, I just wanted to get everyone else's opinion on that, in terms of if we feel like this is something that should continue on as an action item.
Well, as I looked at the content that was here and look at slide 10, I think was the first one just before this, right? So you've got the two loops. Slide 11, I think, did a really nice job of showing some of the drivers that we had in our discussion of, so what? Why is the path or the loop going here? And then the third very well could be taking a look at what does it take to construct it, the time frame, whether it's the annual PAC funding that still we could jointly have a discussion around. That seems to check many of the boxes that were on that initiative. But I'd be open to others that were involved in the work team as well.
Julie and I had talked about this. She's not here, but we talked about that as well. That we felt like this is kind of the, it's kind of done. It's kind of planned. It's not done. It's kind of planned, and the wheels are in motion. I think we can be an advisory if you guys need us, but I think from a project actions perspective, I don't know that we need to have any more offside meetings to continue this on. I think we continue to have a liaison partnership. I think that's as you being the owner, but I don't know that there's anything else that we should. Do you agree, Eric? Anything else that you think we should be doing before we call this a?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That would be the one thing I'd say is still open. As Eric noted, the wayfinding constantly comes up for us as well. But.
And I think that was one thing that we did have listed as some of the, and maybe it's helping utilize that funding of some of those easier, smaller signages that aren't super expensive that can help in terms of the wayfinding. There are a few that do exist, like the one I mentioned on Wooddale to Roslyn and to Pamela, but I think there's an opportunity for some of those, and I think we could help utilize some of the funding, but I don't know that it's bigger than that. Do you have a strong opinion, Barry?
I was going to, Chair, if you wanted to recognize the member of the Transportation Commission that's in attendance this evening.
Eric, do you want to get up and introduce yourself as the...
Just for the record.
For the record.
For the record, a member of the
Give him
Transportation
the microphone
Commission
for a
is
second.
Eric Ruthorf. I've been on the Transportation Commission for the last 3 years. And
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Good. Anything else? Perry?
I was going to add to Commissioner Nelson's comments, we can continue to strengthen the liaison role for Andrew and I. And in addition, look at, some of how those transportation versus passive connections are viewed. I think we can have that discussion and continue to update the commissions.
I had one last thing before I let you go. Educate me. Tactical urbanism. What does that mean?
I was wondering if anyone was going to ask about that. So tactical urbanism is, I'm not going to have the exact definition, but essentially it's a way of looking at kind of testing out low-cost strategies to make it's essentially experimenting with possible solutions before you dedicate money and resources into a long-term solution. So
Okay.
the current example, if any of you have driven on West 72nd Street in the South Cornelia neighborhood within the last month, you may have seen new pavement markings and a lot of traffic cones. The city is experimenting there with temporary curb extensions to see if that would be a benefit to pedestrian safety and help reduce vehicle speeds. So rather than just deciding to go whole hog and put in new curb extensions, we tested it out with pavement markings, which are relatively inexpensive, and then we set up a bunch of cone delineators to observe how traffic would operate if we were to install them permanently. So that's an example of
Okay.
tactical urbanism.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Eric, thank you as well. Appreciate your help on this. Okay, next up, park assignment discussion. Perry, you want to take us through that one?
Absolutely, Chair, members of the commission. We had briefly discussed the park assignments reestablishment, I guess you could say. This was a prior item that the commission had done in years past, and there seemed to be general consensus moving forward, and I think the idea was to come back and look at a list of optional ideas of what commissioners would do upon assignments. So I kind of had outlined those in your staff report, but just kind of provide that firsthand observation in our park system or liaison with users for the work plan items. I think you've been kind of doing that on your own now. Be a representative to various volunteer or adopt a park groups that are working within the park system. One of the items that you had on possibly for the 2020 work plan, whether that goes forward or not, but it's still a good idea to develop a relationship with residents, neighborhood groups, athletic associations, or others that are using the park system. Possibly be involved as kind of a liaison to a project that impacts that system. And as well, we kind of had a conversation about it at that, was it August, I believe, the August meeting, about what to do about when you do notice things. And if they are kind of those hazard type things, is report using the 911 system or or the 311 system. I forget, it's 311, it's not, what did we say, well, you could use that, if it's that hazardous, you could definitely use 911, or the police non-emergency number. We are actually in the process of reviewing kind of a park maintenance section on our city website as well, because we are kind of getting some of those odd ones where we've had people notice that maybe a sprinkler head was broken in a park, or had been broken during play and water was running. So how do people kind of translate that to us so we can get them kind of in real time and dispatch people that we have on call? So so if it is something hazardous, we do want to know that as well. Excuse me. So kind of just had a couple of discussion questions for the commission this evening, supporting the establishment of park assignments again, and then other additional ideas for strengthening kind of the role for that group that would go out there. I did list in your packet the parks as well as kind of their park type to kind of give you an idea of size that you would be talking about on those. If you're familiar with your area, your favorite park, I'm sure you're very knowledgeable about it, but maybe there are others in that system. If you do want to go forward, I'm not sure what the best method to do assignments this evening is. If you wanted to quick all weigh in and grab your favorite, or if you wanted to email me those and I could put them on a list to see if we had any gaps or not, or how that would go, however you wanted to do that lottery. We can discuss that process.
Okay.
So just
Thanks.
kind of that question about going forward with establishment, ideas to strengthen that if so, and then assignments themselves.
Janet, do you still have the list from before?
Yeah, I don't have it with me right now.
No,
but
I
yeah.
know. I'm just curious because I think that would be a good starting place too.
Comments, questions from commissioners on the idea?
I like the idea, but I liked it when we first instigated it. I thought it was a good way just to make sure that we were out in the parks, and I thought we had some really interesting discussions sometimes on some of the parks and some of the things that were happening there. So I'd be supportive of it. Another thing we did, and whether or not we wanted to do this again, but we tried to assign parks that individuals may not have wouldn't normally frequent. And I don't know if that worked well or was difficult, so.
Other thoughts, inputs, questions?
I still think it's a great idea. I just remember from the past, there wasn't, like you talk about the connections to the associations, neighborhood groups and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw any of that. Like for Lewis Park, where I was, and I mean, I know they play soccer there, but I didn't see, any other information on, is it owned by somebody? Is there a neighborhood association that does anything there? So learning all that would be fantastic, because otherwise it was a big mystery to me.
I think part of that thought process, Mike, was to look at our list of athletic associations and decide, do we want to have liaisons from the park commission with those athletic associations? So again, I think our intent when we brought this up in August was, how do we become more proactive and engaging, as opposed to waiting until somebody had an issue or a problem and they brought it to the department or they brought it to the park commission. Mm-hmm. But we haven't done that in the past, right? So I haven't seen anything before on trying to assign us to any commissions.
Yeah.
We certainly did from the park perspective, and I know that there are some neighborhoods as well that are beginning to think, we've had the group from Strachauer come in a couple times and say, hey, this is our neighborhood committee that focuses on the park, so how do we become more aware of those opportunities as well?
And just as far as sports associations go, of course, they use numerous parks. Right. So there could be, every single person could be the liaison to, the football program, because they're at so many parks.
Well, yeah, if we did it via parks to the association, or we said a layer in addition was, this individual is with EFA, this individual is with ESA, et cetera, if we thought that had value.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
The only other thought I had as I went through this is, and we may have talked about this a little bit in August, is how do we provide appropriate, concise feedback so it's meaningful, right? We can go through a park and come back with 2 lines of something, or somebody writes a half-page narrative and says, who do I email this to? I don't know if either one of those is useful. Right? And in my head, I kind of thought, when I walk through a park, I tend to look at, how's it being used? What condition is it in? Do I see anything that's a concern? Maybe look for some areas of fit for purpose. And I think, Perry, you and I talked about this a little bit in a park that I went to recently that had a nice backstop for baseball, but then it had 2 big tree limbs hanging right in front of it. And I thought, well, no one's really going to be playing baseball here then. And then any ideas or suggestions that we might have to pass along. How do we kind of create something that's meaningful from a department perspective, as opposed to just rambling on at a commission meeting once a month? So maybe we need to crystallize that a little bit as well. But otherwise, I'm also fully supportive of it and willing to reconnect, whether it's the same parks we had before, or if with some new members, we want to put our names in and make sure we get them all assigned. The only one that I circled as on the list that you gave as maybe a question mark was Braemar Park itself. It just seems to be a rather large one for somebody to... I know Mike would like that, because he can just walk over there often, and doesn't even have to leave his yard. Get out of my yard.
I'd like to get, Perry, your perspective on the sports associations, because it would seem to me that we'd be another layer. I would think the sports associations, if they have an issue, would want to get an answer from staff and not have to go through a park commissioner who would then have to go through you and then get back to them, and understanding the rules and whatever, because you have all the contracts with them and what have you. So I'm wondering if that's just a layer that is just going to cause more a delay in responding to issues.
Yeah. Commissioners, I think it depends on, what type of scenario we're in that discussion. I think right now, staff is helping me connect to all the associations and kind of set up introductory meetings with them. I've met with a number of associations already and plan to meet with the next wave as well soon. And I think that's one piece to kind of reiterate is, staff to association is the most appropriate topic. But I think when we look at maybe it's less about maybe the here and now we have an issue with scheduling or we have an issue with a field condition. It's maybe more about what do associations need in the future? Where is their attendance going? To where I think, it would be maybe of benefit to have a commissioner there to maybe think through what type of requests could come to a board or to the commission in the future when they say, we are planning based on our projections, we're going to need an additional 75 hours per fall. Where would that come from? What do we need to look forward to, especially as we hit next year planning a CIP? I think maybe those discussions are going to be absolutely beneficial to have commissioners in the room to kind of say, what is that advisory piece that we can play going forward? But when it comes to, like you said, scheduling or allotment right now, I think it does work staff to association, but I think, maybe it's once a year or it's a benefit to bring them in and maybe have them give an update to the full commission, and maybe something that could be an outreach piece for commissioners to do with them. I think it would be interesting to have associations come in and just update you on where they're at with numbers and their play and what they've accomplished over the years, where some of their goals are, and kind of how that all lines up. Especially when they're very successful. It's nice to recognize success.
Yeah, good question though, Eileen. So in closure here, let me recommend that I think what I'm hearing is we think this is a good idea. We'd like to reestablish it. Let's start out by going through this list, and since some of us weren't here when we first set this up, sending Perry and Janet your thoughts on pick out anywhere from 3 to 6, and they may align with what Janet already has for some of us, but let's at least do that. And then we can also learn, is there a neighborhood association that's tied to those parks that we've been assigned to? And then I think the third layer would be, then let's address our list of athletic associations. And if there's some on the commission that have a strong affiliation for one or two of those and would like to volunteer to at least give that a trial and see how that works, we could add a couple of those as well.
And I think, Chair, we could, as staff, come up with maybe some options about what a appropriate feedback tool looks like.
That'd be great. That'd be helpful.
What does that look like? If it's a template or how we might build that out to be of use.
Something that's relatively simple yet useful for the department. Doesn't overwhelm you with data that you're figuring out what you got to do with now, huh? Okay, great. Thank you for that discussion. Next up, consideration of special project guidelines. And Perry, I believe you have that one for us as well.
Chair and Commissioners, I think it may be a little bit appropriate based on the community feedback we received this evening. In the short time that I've been here, I've gotten a number of requests from either individuals, interested users about kind of ideas they have or things they want to do that, when we look at our current system or our capital plan isn't in the cards right now. And rather than maybe send them off with a hard no, is what could they look to do to maybe be invested in that process. So I had done this before, but I had thought developing maybe some special project guidelines of when people come in for a request that we can respond to say, that's an interesting idea. Before we go on, have you thought about these things? And some of these are probably going to have to be answered by staff, which is okay. But on the other hand, I think it would be interesting to kind of get the proposer to be involved a little bit in that process. Either way, I think it would be beneficial to get feedback from the commission to say when a special project does come to you, in that, do we want to recommend this to go forward or not? What questions would you have kind of from the outset that we could start to answer to help formulate that process or that project when it gets to you? So that was kind of my thought in putting this together. It's been getting a number of requests to meet with people and a couple in the near horizon. So I kind of thought maybe this would be a good time to check in and just say, what else should we be thinking about as we go through this?
Perry, when I read through this when we got the thing, the only question I had was, and using tonight as an example, does it make sense? I mean, the guidelines are great, but does it make sense to shorten this up, kind of have a high level thing, and then have people bring it to this committee, and then we recommend if there's going to be further investigation, just so that you can start to have some vetting of this? Because otherwise, you might get a lot of these, and I think you might find that people are going to get frustrated because they don't have a lot of transparency in seeing how the process kind of plays out as once it gets to wherever this sends to an email box, a post office box, whatever that may be. At least if they see it come here and we hear what this idea is and we recommend that we'll do further stuff, then we can be held accountable then and say, this is what at least to that individual person, use Oscar as an example. If he'd come with this and said, I want to look at a skate park viability, and we said we should continue to do that, we could deliver back to Oscar, we've done the due diligence, and this is something that we'll continue to investigate. We're going to move forward on whatever. That's just a thought of another layer. So this isn't just going onto your desk. That gives this group a little bit more of, I think what the role is, what we originally all signed up for, was to have a little bit more of a helpful hand in helping guide some of the stuff that you need to work on.
And if I could build off of that, maybe with just a little bit different view of this, was can we narrow this down to 6 or 7 questions, right? Because I think a community member could get frustrated by looking at this and saying, well, I came up with this idea and the city gave me back 30 things they wanted me to think about. So maybe we layer it a bit to say, what would be the 6 or 8 critical things we'd want to have some additional input on? And then to Matt's point, after a little bit of work's been done, then maybe we engage a little further and say, well, here was the next layer, right? Here's what we've discovered, here's what we think, here's the next layer we need some help on.
Sort of like kind of a pre-screen litmus test, kind
right.
of. Sure.
So which of these things would be truly helpful and critical to helping us decide, yeah, this is a really interesting idea and we should put some effort into it, as opposed to looking at 30 different questions down here and thinking, oh, I'm not going to get to any of these, so I guess they really don't want to hear it, right? I mean, they want to hear it, but they don't really want to hear it.
And the only other thing I would say, sorry, to also add to that, is making a clear definition up front of what is a special project. What is defined as a special project? Is it something that is not completely served at anywhere in the community right now? Is it you're trying to enhance something that is outdated? Because on the agenda item in the packet, you talked about redoing playgrounds. To me, that just seems like it's something that, how it doesn't get done, it's a whole different conversation. But, to me, that's not a special project. That's just something we should be doing, right? A skate park or a climbing wall, the outdoor CrossFit area that you talked about, those are, to me, are special projects because there's not something being served. So a clear definition of that, I think, would be important too.
So one other thing I thought we should have maybe at the front end of this is, how does the project advance our strategic plan, or maybe it's fit in with the comprehensive plan? So if they can put some thought to how it fits in with our kind of 5-year expectations or whatever it might be. I think that could be key to prioritizing. If it fits with the strategic plan, it might be higher priority.
Corin?
I agree. I think that it's something that is necessary. I like the idea of giving them a smaller list of criteria, and then I like having to present here. So I did get an email from Oscar, and I was like, this is great. Here's something, I was like, you can have for 3 minutes to talk. Not only does it give us all visibility, but it gives visibility to anybody who watches. So if the councilor is watching, they also have visibility. So, and maybe other residents are too, so they can say, oh, it's already been covered, or follow up on it. So I think just giving some visibility instead of people saying like, no one even wants a skate park. What are they talking about? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, people are talking about it. So I think it gives more visibility. I like having that, and it also makes people actually have to like, it's not just sending an email to nobody. Their name and their face goes to the project. So instead of it just being I feel like so oftentimes we have like lots of mouths moving, but we never know who actually is talking. And so I think it's, having to stand up in front of everybody. The first time you ever come in this room, it's a little intimidating, right? So and you're like, oh, I see myself on the screen. So I think actually having to put themselves out there and say, hey, here's an idea I have. Here's what I think we should do on it. Here's the research I've done for it. And hopefully saying, if you guys want to do it, maybe I could be helpful in some way. So I think it's great. I just think that we should be more concise, and I love the visibility. I think that's a great point, Matt.
And one point to add on to that, it didn't seem to me that Oscar was intimidated at all.
Sweet little Oscar. He's given me 100 questions over 7 emails. So adorable.
Did a great job.
He did so great. It was awesome. And that's what I think, that no one ever comes to community comments. And I think it doesn't always have to be someone who's upset. It's just like, I think it's a great use of it. We have it on our agenda. It's always there.
Yep.
So I think the more that we can encourage people to come, then We're not just talking to ourselves.
Yep, agreed. Other thoughts on this item? Everyone in general opinion that it's a good idea, we should layer it on? Make it a little bit more concise, a little bit more strategic up front, something that gives us a little bit of a first gate filter, if you would.
Maybe we'll even brand it so it doesn't look like a bunch of characters on a piece of paper.
That's right.
Just one question. How is special projects different than CIP? And how would people know if what they're thinking about is already on a CIP?
I think the first question is defining that special project. I would look at that kind of as Commissioner Darlene did as well, which is something maybe we don't have, or it's a change in use, where someone's coming kind of up with that idea. I think people that want to reprioritize a CIP, that's another conversation. And I think we've talked a little bit, I think either in your work group for the future funding projects, is just how visible is our current CIP and what does that look like? And I think that's a step that we need to discuss in the future, as well as how do people know that X park is slated for this year. And I think that's an additional piece of awareness. And I don't think it's a transparency issue. I think there's a lot of information to digest, and I think how can we make that easier for people?
Right.
Because that's another set of calls that we get often as well, is when is this happening, or why isn't it happening, and here's the reasons why.
Sure. Okay.
Good. Give you enough
Perfect.
insight
Thank you.
and information?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, next item up, Parks and Recreation Commission work plan, and we have two pieces. The second will be brief. That's just for information for a 2020 draft, but I can speak to that a bit. The first, just to give us an opportunity, as we do each month, any updates on 2019 annual work plan items. I see, it looks like Corin already had her insight in here, because I see initiative number 3 is marked completed on the document that I have. So she was taking the stance that was ready to go. Anyone want to update anything to the commission tonight on your initiatives?
For the alternative funding, we met last week, and we've got we have 3 legs, I think, that we're pursuing now, and one being the leveraging of the assets that we have. And we've got a proposal from a group that met with us, and Eileen's going to talk with Scott about that and run that one down. The outside nonprofit funding, a la People for Parks, like Minneapolis has. Rick is going to meet with a person who lives in Edina who works or is on the board for People for Parks, and also start to flesh out what that might look like. That's not a function of this group, of the commission. That is an outside organization that could and maybe should be put together, but what our job would be is to figure out what the rules of engagement would be, what it could look like, what it would look like, how to set it up. And we talked about it being kind of for special projects, so it's not just a big generalized fund, but it's for specific things that people want to get done. So Rick is going to run with that one. And then the third one goes back to an article that you sent a couple months ago about Denver running into funding issues for their parks because they don't get any fees. They don't charge any fees for development in their city, so they don't get any money for their parks, and they're running into issues. Well, how do we improve things when we've got all these people moving in? And I recall hearing numerous times that the dedication fees that the park system used to get have kind of dried up because of developers have figured out how to wiggle around the rules and not pay anything. And it seems kind of clear to me that, well, if they've wiggled around to try to figure out how to not pay them, that doesn't really, that's not really fair to the city and the park system, because it puts more stress on everything else to fund all this commerce and population that's moving in. So we should talk to the Planning Commission and Council about what we can do to get those fees back again. So we'll work that third leg also.
Okay, good, thank you. And I know we had, of our 7, we had one that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Perry.
I was just going to add on initiative number 6, staff has just sent some of those policies to that sub-working group so that the paint is still wet there, I guess you could say. We'll work with those 3, I think, is it Brenda, Julie, and Brenda?
Just the 2 of you.
Just you? Okay, I thought.
6.
You're not on 6. Okay, sorry. I keep copying you on that email, then I'll stop doing that. So we had just, staff had just sent, I think at the tail end of last week, those policies for review. So I think maybe over the next month or so, we can have a conversation with that work group and see where we go from there.
Okay.
I can give you an update on number 7. So I had a conference call with that group the day after our last park board meeting. It looks like we have identified how to actually go through the process. I sent you the information, Perry. It's going to take, it's a lot more time and effort to get our city to be AARP recognized than anticipated. So there's actually a lot of work, and it's going to actually be a whole other staff member to actually be able to take us through it. So it's really evaluating, is the bang for the buck there, and what does that look like? So that's really, as the working team, it's really kind of where we came down to of saying this is going to actually require the city to make a decision if this is that important to them or not, and if it is, then we need to have an extra resource dedicated to it. It sounds like some of the cities that have done this, it's like a several year process because it's quite a few steps you have to take, and there's quite a few hours that are going to take to do it. So that was the feedback from our group, was we basically said we know what we need, and now we've given to the city to make the decision. So I don't know that it's really a closed item, but I think we've done as much as we can.
No, it's a helpful update, because I believe that Human Rights and Relations had that one back again on its 2020 work plan, and we didn't. So that explains then the difference there. Okay, good. Any other updates? All right. So on the 1st of October, looking at our 2020 draft, and I won't go into this in detail because this has a number of iterations to go through now with the City Council, but just to let you know that Perry and I were present to review when all the commissions reviewed their ideas and suggestions, recommendations for 2020 work plans. We presented the 7 that you have in your packet here tonight. No intent to go into them in any detail. We did have one carryover from this year, and that was one of the ones around the Race and Equity Task Force recommendations. And we certainly did lay at the table both the Braemar Master Plan and the Fred Richards Master Plan to make some progress steps on those. But those are now in the hands of City Council to look at all the different recommendations they received from the different commissions, to look at their own strategies, plans going forward, and we'll hear back from them over the next 45 to 60 days, I think it is, Perry, on their thoughts and insights on what they would like us to do.
That's correct. I think we have a liaison meeting at the end of October, and then the council puts together their thoughts. I would say the common theme was tree preservation.
There was a lot of tree preservation discussions, yes, indeed.
Yes. On a lot of various commissions. Yeah.
Yep. You're right. If there was a theme of the evening, that was probably it, because we did hear that a lot. And as we've seen in years past, expect our recommendations to change. I don't think, and Brenda, you can probably say from years before, I don't think we've had a time when we put in a slate and they all came back and said, perfect, just go do those, right? But so we'll see what comes back to us.
I would just
like
challenge Perry, as new in his role, that you push back if you see these based off of the slate of stuff that we saw this year. I think quite a few of them, if not an overwhelming majority of them, were not things that we were on our radar. So I guess to me, it would be the challenge of, how much is affecting Parks and Rec as a department and as a user base for the things that were being talked about, as well as, I'm all for cross-commission, liaison, those types of things, and I think that's really good to be included in those, but to really kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of who really is owning this stuff. When it's the race and equity stuff, I think it's hard for us as a Park and Recreation Commission to kind of wear that hat, because we have a commission that's supposed to be the guiding commissioners of that group. So makes sense for us to be part of that, since parks facilities might be included in some of the things, but that's just an example. So hopefully you get to still wear that I'm the new guy and I'm going to question what you're telling me to do.
And I do think that was another theme, at least we certainly expressed it, is like the concept of the cross-commission initiatives. They were somewhat challenging to really get grounded and get some traction. But I'd point to the one we just covered tonight and say the fact that that was cross-commission ended up getting us to a result that if we were doing it on our own, we may have kind of gone down different paths, right? So it does have both sides of it, but it's good input.
So the only one I would add to it, and I think I've said it every year now, is I don't think we ever have maintenance on here of like, what are we doing to maintain the playgrounds and parks that currently exist. So I think it should be an ongoing thing on our action items of making sure that we have a radar of, here's the ones that say that they're in poor shape and they're prioritized, and how we're getting to fund them, and how do we as a commission get pulled in to help whichever these parks are. Because I feel like we always focus on the new and shiny objects, but we don't want to bring our other objects along with us. So I always want to try to put that on there if possible. They can take it off, but I like to put it on first.
I would say it's maybe not worded exactly like that, but I think initiative number 4 on the 2020 proposed would encompass that, about prioritizing kind of our existing amenities as well.
And I think it is more appropriate now than a couple of years ago when it was a separate department. And now it's all folded up under Parks and Recs and maintenance, and that was managed separately under the city structure before, but now it does flow up in one. So
I think oftentimes we make these ones that are big and bold, and they almost encompass everything, and they don't encompass anything. So I just want to make sure that we specifically know that when we say we're trying to build these parks, and people say, "Hey, I see my parks next on the list," like we talked about, Perry, and they're like, we're like, "Yeah, not really." So we make sure we have an understanding of it, so when people ask us, that we can answer that smartly.
Yep. Okay, thank you for those. Next section, Chair and Commissioner comments. Any Commissioner comments this month? Anybody?
I was able to play Braemar Golf Course last week. As I rolled off 18, I got to see Commissioner Itis holding court on the putting green. That was fun to watch. But I was really pleased to see, I had some reservations when we played in May about how it was going to hold up after the first season, just because, I know we wanted to get open, and we wanted to get people out there, and people wanted to enjoy and use the amenity, and feel like there was going to be a ton of rounds played, but it was great. So I know we've had a wet year, but it's kind of worked to our advantage. So it was in really good shape. So kudos to Joe and the staff out there, and I think it was really nice.
Thank you. I'll pass that along.
Anyone else? Rick?
Shout out to Eileen. She did win her category in the first club championship.
Ooh, hey.
It was tough.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. And it's still in nice shape. I played today. So since May 15th, I've probably played 45 times already there. It's a nice golf course.
I'm sure that's not the mean. But,
That's right, but we like it. It's good to hear. I've got a couple to add if no one else has anything else. We did have representation at the Open Streets event again this year. So thank you to Bryn and Mike and Julie, who's not present tonight, who helped out there. I think it was another good representation from the city perspective and from our perspective until it began to rain. That kind of cut things short. And the only commentary I'd have for the commission was this year we seem to have a lot of people that were new residents into Edina. Last year we didn't have that as much. Last year was people that may have had a particular project or an issue that they wanted to talk about, and we engaged them on that. This year it was people that were saying, we just moved into Edina, and it was fun to see the connections, right? Bryn had people that were neighbors and people that she went to school with, and Mike had people that moved in down the street, and Julie had people that she was in classes with kids for, and so it was indeed a fun community event and fun to see the emphasis of new residents or people that lived just across the border of Edina and were kind of learning something about it. So I think that was very nice. But again, I'd suggest we keep that on our calendar for years ahead and keep looking for other ways that we can engage and build awareness about what's happening in our park and recreation assets. Second, in some of the tours of parks that I made this past month, I did another drive-through from Arden, and Arden got, at least from what I heard on Open Streets, all positive feedback about people that are excited about it. We had one resident that came up and said even the people that live near us that were negative about it at first have become positive about it. Now, I'm sure that doesn't hit 100% of the population there, but it does seem to be a good current. And so just a few things, and I brought this up once before, but I'll get on a bit of a soapbox here at the end. One, there were people utilizing the park already, right? So yes, it's a good park. It's good to see people wanting to get re-engaged and be at the park. It's clearly not ready yet. Much of that has to do with weather, and that's delaying us to some degree, but there were people on the playground, there were people walking on the paths. I just didn't happen to see anybody in the shelter yet, but I was looking just in case. So that was, two sides of that coin. And the second was it's somewhat disappointing from a community perspective that people don't respect the fact that that's not an open park yet. And they have broken down barriers, and they have climbed over fences, and they have done whatever they think that it's okay to do. The third part of that, though, frankly, is on us to say when we see that happening, if we don't think that park is safe yet, we need to take a more stringent stance to stop people from going in, right? And that doesn't mean it's police presence, but we have a flimsy little caution tape that's put up over a bridge that somebody's going to cut right through without a problem. Right? The fencing around the playground was pretty easy to knock over, and once it's down, it's stayed down. And so I think as a department and as a city, we've got to kind of step back and say, if we really don't think people should be there, how do we take a more proactive step to keep people safe and keep them out of that property? Because there were a dozen people that were on the playground, right? And that's just something we've got to deal with. And I do want to say, and maybe Perry will note this as well, I know the walk with the mayor is coming up here later this month, so hopefully the weather is nice and we can walk around the perimeter. But
I just had a couple other questions too, and maybe you'll tee this up. When is the dome going up? When is the golf course closing? And where are we at with the, top tracer technology going into the dome?
The golf dome, sorry.
So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Are there any other commissioner comments? Otherwise, I'll go into my staff updates, and I'll just touch on those right away then. The sports dome is slated to go up Saturday. It's been under preparation for the last several weeks. All the doors have been installed. There's a lot of work getting the assets out and ready for installation. But the big day is Saturday the 12th. However, I believe it is scheduled to be a very windy day on Saturday, so contingency might push that into the next week. But all intensive, that's about a 20 to 25 day process to get it fully ready to go. So we're looking at a November 1 start, roughly around in the dome, for the sports dome. The golf dome itself will actually open November 1st, and in talking with Joe, we'll be playing golf until it gets too cold to play golf. As long as the course is still in good condition and the maintenance staff can get done what they want to do, that'll continue to happen. There will be a switch in the near future of hitting off of mats only on the driving range. I don't have that date specific yet. It's already on. Yeah, I knew it would be getting close. But
Can I ask Rick when it's too cold to play golf?
There might be two definitions of when it's too cold to play golf, correct? Yours and Jeff's. So, but that'll be that. And then, what was your third question? Top tracer is being installed. That'll be ready for the opening as well. I believe they were waiting for some cabling trays as well. So, so that should all be ready to go by November 1. In response to Arden Park, yes, the walk with the mayor is Saturday the 19th. That is at 9 a.m. if you are interested in attending. Some recent updates. Power is now fully at the building. The patio areas, I think on the front and the back, that kind of overlook the creek on the one side and the playground on the other, were being poured today. The stonework on the bottom half of the building was all being installed, if you remember that. Work on the plantings continue. I think that's been the most delayed by the weather, is all of that. The rink is being built right now. The hockey lights for open and the rink skating are already being installed. And the playground and the safety surface has been installed. So, Chair, you are correct. We have a number of people using that park. Right now, the contractor technically owns the site. We've talked through what does that mean from that liability perspective. I think at this point, they're kind of resigned to people using the park. They're not using a lot of heavy equipment anymore. And I think that was their general concern was, are there any hidden risk points within the park if people come in after hours? Now, it is getting dark a lot earlier, but at this point, they're going to try to get some trails up, and if they had to kind of re-fence some areas, so if people were going to use the playground, they wouldn't have to tear down the fence, they could just walk up one of the paths and things like that. So they're trying to be sensitive, but yet know that, as from a perspective, they do own that site itself. So hopefully we can make some good progress by the 19th. But I think the way it sounds, the initial goal for this year was to ensure we have the warming house open and skating completed. So there'll be most likely a lot of vegetation, establishment, et cetera, for next year. So,
Is there a ribbon cutting date set that they're hoping to get things done by?
Yeah, we'll probably do a ribbon cutting next year. We are trying to plan, this is the 70th year of hockey at Arden Park. So the first year was 1949, I believe, that they had hockey there. So we're going to try to plan kind of a New Year's Eve skate for the neighborhood and kind of do something special. Maybe try to engage the neighborhood association to help us with something for New Year's Eve to do some type of informal kind of welcome the park's open, et cetera, type thing. So once we kind of have that ironed out, I'll definitely let the commission know if that's anything they'd be interested in, or some retro skating hats or something of some sort. But the Fred Richards Park, Phase 1, the playground equipment has, obviously the weather has also delayed playground installers this year. If you recall, I think it was July, we approved contracts for the site construction, the shelter, and the playground. The playground installers showed up today. They're starting to assemble that piece of it. So we're going to actually have a ribbon cutting for Fred Richards. We'll get something out maybe a little more formal to you. But on Monday, October 28th, wear your costumes and candies kind of a theme. 4 to 6:30. We're going to have a little official opening of the park for the neighborhood there with a ribbon cutting at 5:30. So we'll get that out to you a little bit more official. But that playground should be installed this week and ready to go by probably the week after. Still not sure on delivery of the shelter itself. So that's taking the longest to manufacture. Let's see. I think you had the presentation from Andrew tonight, but a couple other pieces that we wanted to make you know that we are working with the engineering department on this year. There's going to be 3 road reconstruction projects that are in and around parks this year. So we'll be planning how to adapt to work through some of those closures for our programming or scheduling. West 58th Street is on the 2020 road reconstruct plan. So that's the north side of Pamela Park's entrance. West 62nd Street, which is the south side of Pamela Park, is also going to be under construction next year. So, accommodating that type of activity, we need to make sure we're on there. And then Melody Lake A and Grandview A areas. So basically that's Garden Park on the east side. Will also be under construction. So engineering has engaged us in that review, and kind of in that similar atmosphere. If we kind of know, hey, it would be great if you're going to bring this sidewalk in, can you take it another 50 yards into the park? So having that kind of connection as well is going to be important going forward. Centennial Lakes Parks, the bridge railings have now completely been installed, so that's all ready to go. Mini golf closed this year, so you can't go there to play mini golf anymore. And then the sidewalk repairs, I think, if you remember during our meeting down there, Tom had mentioned they had one section to upgrade. That will happen probably beginning next week, weather dependent yet for this season. And then the community gardens are closing October 31st for the season. If you weren't aware, engineering has a sewer rehabilitation project which goes underneath the gardens. So over the winter, they're going to be excavating through the community gardens to access that sewer pipe, replace that, and then do rehabilitation over the top of it. So the community gardens will go back in where they currently are, but they're going to be displaced over the winter. Project goals are to have that up and running by spring planting season. So I'll be brief and call it at that. So.
That's everything? Okay. I did notice I had one last note here because it came up at our meeting last month, and Tiffany was nice enough to follow up on our question about the tennis courts at Creek Valley. And what she did hear back is that the Creek Valley tennis courts are open all of the time. The only outside facilities that the school says they lock when not in use are the high school lower multi-purpose fields and Coolman Stadium. So those tennis courts are open and available to the community. So that was good to hear. Okay, any last comments? With that, can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Go Twins.